In this video, we're going to look at the circumference and area of a circle. So when we're doing that, you just have to talk about some definitions. So when we have a circle, we can have the distance from the middle of the circle out to the outside, and that distance is known as the radius. The radius is the same no matter where you measure from, because it's always the same distance from the center to the outside edge of a circle. Another measurement we talk about on the circle is the distance all the way across. And if you go all the way across a circle through the center, that distance is called the diameter. And you can kind of think about that if you had the radius that was halfway across and then you took another radius to go all the way across, that same distance would be the diameter. So the radius is the distance from the center to the edge. The diameter is the distance all the way across. So the diameter is always equal to 2 times the radius. So the diameter is the same as 2 times the radius. So the other thing with a circle is just talking about the distance around the outside, which for most things we call the perimeter, but for a circle, the distance around outside is called the circumference. So circumference is a special word that is like the perimeter of a circle. So it just has a special name if you have a circle, the distance around the outside. So we're going to talk about how to find the circumference of a circle and how to find the area. But in doing that, we'll need a special constant, and that constant is known as pi. And you might have seen pi before. It's often used with the Greek letter for pi. And pi is the ratio of the circumference of a circle, so the distance around, divided by the diameter. And it turns out if you take all kinds of circles of different sizes and you measure their circumference and you measure their diameter, it would always have the same ratio. And it's actually a number that is irrational, which means the decimal goes on and on and on without repeating. And if you have a calculator that's a scientific calculator, it'll have a pi button on it. But if we're just using a shortcut rounded version of pi, we usually use the number 3.14. So that's what I'll be using today, because we can use that on any calculator. So the formulas that we're going to use are the formula for circumference, which turns out to be pi times the diameter. So the circumference of a circle is always pi times the diameter. So that is one formula we'll need, circumference of the circle. The other formula that we're going to be needing is the formula for area. So the area of a circle is actually going to be pi times the radius squared, which is the same as saying pi times the radius times the radius. So that is the other formula we're going to be using. So circumference, pi times the diameter, area, pi times the radius squared, or pi times the radius times the radius. So let's try a couple examples. Let's say we started with with a circle, and we were told in this circle it had a radius equal to 5 inches. So let's see if we could figure out our circumference and our area. So we know that circumference is always pi times the diameter. Well, I know the radius halfway across, so my diameter would have to be equal to 2 times the radius, twice that much. So 2 times 5, or 10. So if they only gave me the radius, I'd have to double it, so I'd know what the diameter is to use in my formula. So now I'm going to plug into my formula pi, which I told you would use the number 3.14, times in this case the diameter, which was 10. And I can use a calculator and multiply those, and I'll get 31.4 inches. So the circumference of that circle, meaning if I measured around the outside with a measuring tape, would be 34.1 inches. The area is pi times the radius squared. So I'm going to plug in my numbers. Pi was 3.14. The radius squared just means the radius times the radius. And in this case, the radius was 5 inches, so 5 times 5. And again, I'm going to just type that into a calculator to figure out 3.14 times 5 times 5. And I'll get the area in this particular case was 78.5. And areas are always little squares filling up the surface, like how many little squares it takes to fill in the circle. So 78.5 square inches. So here's my setup, and then I can do the calculation in the calculator. Let's do one more example. In this one we're given the diameter. So let's say the diameter was given to us, and the diameter was equal to, let's say it was equal to 14 inches. So for the circumference, we know the formula is pi times the diameter. So we're going to type in pi, 3.14, times the diameter, which was 14. And I'll put that into a calculator. I'll get 43.96 inches for my circumference. And my area equals pi times the radius squared. So I need to know the radius, and remember diameter is all the way across, so the radius would be the diameter divided by 2. So to find the radius, I have to divide the diameter in half. So the radius in this case is 7. So I'll put those numbers in. Pi 3.14 times 7 times 7, radius squared. And I'll type that into a calculator. And I get 153.86. And so the area of this circle would be 153.86 inches squared.